Have you ever thought about baby names? I know you have. That was a rhetorical question. You've definitely thought about your own name. How did my parents pick my name? What does it mean? Or you've imagined replicating and having your own kid, and the first question, of course, is, well, what should I call it? Or maybe you fantasized about being an entirely different person, and you thought, well, if I destroy all my identification and move to a new country, what will I call myself? There's a lot of different strategies you can employ when choosing a name. The idea that a child's name can be any word you can conceive of means you need some sort of strategy just to narrow the possibilities down. In some cultures, such as the Vahenda community of South Africa and Zimbabwe, they offload that cognitive burden to their grandparents and let them choose the name. Or other cultures like Iceland, they just don't bother choosing names and instead name them after their own parents. The Aari people of southwest Ethiopia use names to express their collective history, shared life experiences, major events, and their environment. And variations of this strategy are actually used in many different cultures, whether they're aware of it or not. An analysis of Asian and Asian American children's names similarly revealed patterns that reflect cultural beliefs, faiths, wishes, and family histories, while at the same time also seeming to incorporate more nuanced societal issues like discrimination and racial discourse. In the Western world, there seems to be a lot of pressure to find the best name for their newborn that has some sort of significance, and some parents even hire consultants to help them find the very best one. What are the criteria for choosing the optimal name? That's what we're going to get into right now. Lucky for us, as it turns out, the government also wants to get involved in the naming process. In Canada, where I live, every province and territory has some general restrictions on what you can name your child. Names with special characters, the kind you need to have in every password, is not allowed to be in a first name. Nor can names similar to job titles or professional ranks like officer, duke, reverend, his majesty, your lordship, God Almighty, etc. They will be rejected. In Quebec and Alberta, the rules are even more strict. Quebec actually has a naming model that people need to follow, which requires names to conform to French language rules and values, while in Alberta, they'll deny a name if the person adjudicating decides that it's confusing, embarrassing to anyone, misleading, or could be used to defraud the public. This article that I read on baby naming in Canada also listed names that were rejected by the province, or other names that are real names of real people that would have been rejected by the more strict provinces. In the United States, state laws do have restrictions disallowing particular surnames and names with diacritical marks, which are just marks on a letter like an accent from other languages that changes its pronunciation, and also prohibit obscenities, numerals, and pictograms. That said, Americans do not have any limitations on names that would otherwise be awful, and because they can, they go full speed ahead. They must be allowed to do this because of the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment and the Free Speech Clause of the First Amendment. Therefore, they are not stopped from using names such as Constant Snoring, Dewy Odor, Luscious Bacon, Dwayne Pipe, Doris Shutt, Belle E. Akers, Herbie Hind, Barry D. Hatchett, Celia Later, Dictate, Delia Cards, Donkey, Alphabet, Amanda Lynn, Eileen Dover, Gladys Canby, Gottfried at Last, Hank E. Panky, Head of Hair, Eager Beaver, Hope and Pray, Iona Mink, Heidi High, Sweetheart, Cherry Daiquiri Sour, Silverware Jr., Macaroni, I'm a Hog, Lemon Ham, Cherry Pie, Cigar Stubs, Opan Lively Zickerfruce, The Reverend Adam Baum, Birdie Tinkle, Serious Misconduct, Bright Rash, Charity Full of Love, Honest Peak, Safety First, Fanny Plenty, Low Gear, Sybil Bibble, Doodle Dangle Wang, Oofty Goofty Bowman, Birthday Suitor, A Toxin Worm, Preserved Fish, And of course, twins that were named AC and DC, Pete and Repeat, Beginning and End, and Nip and Tuck. So what does the research actually say about the potential consequences of a child's name? It's important to know that psychology literature strongly agrees with the idea that having a strange name can lead to adverse effects on the child's mental health, academic, and professional success. People with undesirable or unattractive names really do suffer in their personal, social, and work lives. The more unusual the name, the bigger the problems. However, they do add that the effect is mitigated if the name has positive connotations. So if you're determined to give your kid an unusual name, make sure it's going to inspire warm, fuzzy feelings in the people that hear it. I do not have an example of one. So let's say you decide not to name your child after your favorite chocolate bar or as an inside joke with your spouse, and instead, for the good of the child, give them a more conventional name. That still leaves you with hundreds of thousands of names if you're sticking with names used by English speakers, or millions of names across all languages and cultures. What the data suggests is that if you want to hit a sweet spot as having a name that is recognizable as belonging to the culture you're living in, but also not being a name that is used by a lot of other people. Some other considerations to keep in mind are that children who dislike their first names are more likely to suffer from low self-esteem. It's also worth considering that in studies, people have been judged as more or less attractive based solely on how attractive their name sounds. So, as I already mentioned, it's often the case that a child's name is chosen by their parents based on their values, expectations, and desires, and yet certain names still end up experiencing a sort of cycle where they fall in and out of fashion between generations. Believe it or not, popular names are liked because they are popular, but also become more popular because they are liked. Names decline in popularity because at some point they become perceived as overused. Parents likely will also want their children to have names different from the people they already know in their social network. Rarer names can allude to an originality or a distinctive nature, which can have benefits such as being positively associated with academic performance, professional standing, and assessments of artistic creativity. With modern-day internet, social media, and worldwide travel, people's social networks are potentially larger than they ever have been before, which should increase the perceived commonality of names, and also lead to increasingly shorter periods a name is considered overused. Naming a child after your favorite influencer is probably not a great idea if you want them to have a unique name, because everyone else following them might have that same idea. Now, if you like getting into the nitty-gritty number crunching and population dynamics, you aren't alone, because as it turns out, baby names are also loved by data analysts, who enjoy finding large sets of related items that can be observed over long periods of time, because with some study, patterns begin to emerge, and those patterns can actually be very useful at not only explaining human behavior changing over time, but can also be applied to other data aggregations that you might not necessarily expect to be related. When researchers looked at frequency distributions of baby names used in the United States over the last 100 years, distinct patterns emerged of names that are introduced and lost every decade, as well as large changes in the frequencies of specific names. They explain the pattern as a simple process where parents randomly copy names from each other, a process similar to models of population genetics with random genetic drift. It also explains why a few names inevitably become highly popular, even if they have no intrinsic superiority. The consequences of people having the same first name are pretty obvious and something everyone's observed, like when people in a classroom or workplace have the same name, or when people are waiting to receive services, like in a medical clinic. There's a potential for mix-up, and people with the same name will be grouped together, which can lead to friction if those individuals feel the need to vie for competition to be the real person with that name. I know that when I was in high school, there were so many Stevens, everyone referred to them all by their last names, which I think they resented because whenever anyone in high school was given a nickname, there was always an edge of insult to it. Having a common name can lead to other problems too, like stereotyping, but interestingly, sometimes people can make correct assumptions about you too. When data was analyzed from 17 million British citizens, they were able to create a model they could then use to estimate the age and gender for 32,000 unique first names. They were able to create profiles based on the rise and decline in popularity of baby names over a 90-year period, and they could correctly infer their age, gender, and key consumer behavior based solely on their first name. Another study looked at the effect of a person's name on housing prospects in the Swedish housing market. They randomly submitted applications for four fictitious, highly educated, and well-behaved, whatever that means, male applicants in response to housing ads. The person with the name associated with the dominant ethnic group, in this case Western European, received the most callbacks from landlords, while people with Eastern European, East Asian, Arabic, or Muslim-sounding names yielded significantly lower callback rates. More than just the familiarity or the perceived ethnic group of a name, but just the component parts of a name can also be more or less appealing to people. The top 5 favorite boys and girls' names from each state in the USA in 2000 and 2003 were analyzed for emotional associations and pronounceability. Girls' names were found to be longer, more pleasant, less active, and easier to pronounce. The phonemes, which are basic units of speech sounds, tend to be associated with certain meanings. This is called the Buba-Kiki effect, where non-words like Buba are associated with round shapes, while Kiki is associated with sharp shapes. An association was observed between round shapes and femaleness and sharp shapes and maleness. And the differences in gender and sound don't end there. Research shows that the parents seem to desire larger, more masculine sons and smaller, more feminine daughters, and this gets encapsulated in sex-stereotyped names. It is believed first names contain some sound symbolism, where male names are more likely to contain larger-sounding phonemes, and an example they give is the name Thomas, while female names contain smaller phonemes, for example, Emily. Studies of human speech have shown male voices with lower formant frequencies and dispersion are perceived as more masculine and more physically and socially dominant. In females, bias towards higher formant frequencies and smaller sounding names advertise the femininity of the individual, symbolically representing their shorter vocal tracts and smaller body size. And also regarding gender, boys are much more likely to get named after someone else in the family compared to girls. And social psychologist Francis McAndrew argues that the naming might serve some evolutionary purpose. That person, who the child was named after, may feel more kinship to the child and give the child more resources. Naming a baby after the father, when the child is born out of wedlock, was a strong predictor of the long-term relationship that father would have with the child. This naming has a profound effect on the father, who are usually delighted by clear signs of paternity. Interestingly, sons named after their dads also wet the bed less and throw less temper tantrums. Giving the child the title junior, however, could lead to psychologically damaging expectations for the child, so avoid doing that. Nobody wants to be a junior their whole life. While it is common for parents to weigh social, familial, and cultural considerations when picking baby names, research has shown that they can also be influenced by their physical environments. In America, researchers analyzed girls' names that corresponded to month and season names, and they referenced those names using geographic and environmental variables. In the continental United States, the names April, May, and June, as well as autumn and summer, were the most common month and season names. April predominates in southern states, where they have early springs, and June predominates in northern states where they have later springs. Autumn is most popular in northern states, where autumn foliage is notably colorful, and eastern states with high coverage of deciduous foliage. Disruptions to normal life, such as times of war, can also have a profound effect on naming. During World War I, the rate of paternal name transmission increased 50% for both men and women, enhanced by a father's level of risk as a soldier. Transmission of an uncle's name increased following his death, regardless of whether he died at war, though the effect was more sustained if he did die at war. I want to wrap things up with some interesting final tidbits you might want to consider when picking names. One study found that people who have an easier to pronounce name are more likely to be believed as being truthful about claims they make. You also want to consider a child's name in context with their siblings. Parents with children whose names have an initial or a final syllable that sounds like their sibling's name are more likely to call them by their sibling's name by mistake. Finally, one study looked at whether a person's own name is processed by the unconscious. Participants played a game where they were shown a letter string on a computer screen and needed to decide whether the string was a name or a non-word under a tight time constraint. The participants were unexpectedly presented with their own name. The speed of the response to their own name was significantly faster, indicating that it was being processed unconsciously. Although at this point it's difficult to articulate what the full implications of this are, clearly the deep imprint that a person's name has on their psyche has deep effects that follow them throughout their entire lives. That's all I got for this one. Happy naming, and thanks for watching.